I'd like to ask you to take a moment, maybe close your eyes if you're comfortable, and think about, at the end of a long week, inviting someone that you really care about to just come over and relax. And now this is a place where you both feel totally safe and accepted. You don't have to think about sounding interesting. You don't have to feel guilty about watching another episode of The Office again. And you don't even have to worry about how many Doritos you eat. And then, in the middle of all of this, I want you to think about if your companion turned to you and said, "I'm sorry, I'm here." And if that sounds like a really weird response in this situation, then you have just a little glimpse into some of my work. I'm a social worker, and the majority of my practice has been working with people who face grief and loss. Right now, I work for an agency that serves people that are living with blindness and visual impairment. So I run support groups and I offer individual counseling for any clients that are facing the big lifestyle changes that come with visual impairment. On a typical day, about 50% of my clients will cry in a session. That number is closer to 80 if you only consider the clients that have the privacy and safety of my closed office door. And the number one reaction when this happens is, "I'm sorry." The fact of the matter is that a lot of my clients aren't really comfortable talking about any of their emotions. They don't just come out and say they're angry that they can't get in their car and drive, or terrified about losing a career. Instead, they're things like frustrated or stressed. Give me a clap if this sounds familiar to you. This is something all of us actually do. People ask us how we are, and we say, "I'm fine." Give me a clap if you've told that lie. And I'm gonna clap for that one too. In fact, when COVID-19 hit, I told everybody I was not only totally fine, but I wrapped myself up in my profession, and I made some kind of embarrassing comments about how social workers are built to deal with crises and how this was our time to shine. So needless to say, 2 weeks later, I was crying with absolutely no reservation in the corner of my shower. This is something that all of us do because we were trained to from the time we were just little tiny children. It started out with things like, "Stop crying, act like a big boy." And then it transitioned into things like, "Just get over it," or "I'm sorry you feel that way." Some of us get wrapped up in our professions or how we're supposed to respond to stress, right? Tightly tangled up in stereotypical gender roles, racial bias, countless other societal pressures. We are taught that our emotional reactions, and therefore our emotions, are something inconvenient, inappropriate, and shameful. The way we feel becomes something bad that needs to be hidden or fixed. Now, grief admittedly has some acceptable social parameters like funerals, but even then we're not really great at allowing it. Even in a global pandemic, we often denied ourselves and each other our grief with phrases like, "Well, I could be worse," or "If you think you've got it bad, you should see this tragedy over here." And so that's part of the reason why more often than not, clients come to me to stop feeling the way they're feeling. They want me to fix it. So then I do what counselors and therapists do. I annoyingly say, "Can't fix it. You're not broken. You're doing what needs to be done." And instead, I ask them more questions And I hold the space for them to talk about what makes them feel jealous or guilty or angry. We acknowledge that we don't really know what the future will look like, and I don't tell them that everything is okay. And if this happens often enough, eventually people stop apologizing for the work. Eventually, people start to realize that allowing themselves to feel bad can actually feel so good. The problem is, most of us don't really know how to do it. So we're going to boil it down into a simple 3-step process. Step 1 is notice it. Most of us have been stuffing our emotions down for so long that we don't even recognize when we're having them. It's not that we tell people that we're fine just because we want to be deceptive. It's that we don't actually know how to answer that question in any given moment. When I facilitate support groups, I often give a series of homework assignments. What are your physical symptoms of anger, fear, or sadness? Now, I used to give these on the spot, but it would grind the group to a halt because most of the time we didn't really know how to answer the question. We'd never paid attention. It was just too hard. But nonetheless, we're going to try it right now together, okay? I want you to give me a clap if you have a pet peeve. Is loud chewing anybody else? Just me? But now I want you to give me a clap if you know exactly where you feel that anger in your body. It's a lot harder to do if you're out of practice. And anger is one of our most accessible emotions. So tasks like sadness or fear become much harder. But just because we don't pay attention to them, it doesn't mean that we don't have emotional reactions. When we're confronted with a perceived threat or a loss, our body produces hormones and neurotransmitters that create physical symptoms, oftentimes long before we're willing to acknowledge them. So that's where we start paying attention. You take a few minutes every day. You could even set an alarm on your phone, and you start checking in with your body. What are the physical symptoms to emotional triggers? And once you've realized that, you can go to step 2, which is name it. My husband has chosen to eat the crunchiest snack he can find while I am trying to watch Bridgerton. So I check in with my body, and my jaw and my neck are tense, and my stomach's kind of, and my fingers are jittery. What am I gonna call this? For me, this is anger. And that's simple, specific taxonomy. Why is that important? Because usually if we ask someone, how are you feeling? They're gonna say, I'm fine, just stressed. So many of us turn to this stressed word because it's a societally acceptable form of discomfort. It's vague, it's impersonal, it's attached to busyness and productivity. Stressed says, I'm totally fine. It's all this outside stuff that's the real problem. The thing is, stressed isn't usually an emotion. It's a term we use to avoid acknowledging the real stuff. So we check in with our body, we notice where we feel things, and then we give the real stuff a real name. I am feeling angry. I am feeling afraid. And when you can do that, then you move on to step 3. You normalize it. And this is the really hard step Because what most of us have been doing is negating it, convincing ourselves and everyone else that our emotions are either invalid or just plain non-existent. But as a good friend said to me, you just have to be brave and sit with it. Because often what we do is ignore emotions until they become too big or too emergent to do anything else with. And I'll give you an example. Have you ever been like rage washing your dishes? I mean like really more rattling these things around than you are cleaning them because your partner or your roommate forgot to do them. And then they come into the kitchen and they're like, what's wrong? And you go, nothing. And my husband is out there right now going, it's a trap, because he knows that his schedule for doing the dishes isn't the real problem here. The problem is that I wasn't willing in that moment to see the dishes piling up. Notice how it makes me feel. Name that, and then give it a voice by saying, this is making me really angry. Can you help me with these dishes? Nope. Instead, we storm around and just hope that everybody can read our mind until we implode into a big old fight about who's more inconsiderate. Give me a clap if you've been there, right? We often avoid these big conversations in the name of civility. But this is the hard personal work that we have to do to create bigger, more meaningful social change. Because if we're not going to allow ourselves to feel and speak this way about dishes, it's going to be way harder to tolerate the emotional displays of bigger issues. We're going to be way more likely to trivialize, placate, or gaslight the emotions of people raising more charged issues. And I do get that this might seem more comfortable, but being able to sit with emotions, whether they're your own or someone else's, and not feel the need to deny them or fight them off, that's peace. And in this time of social and political gridlock, we can't create peace by telling Black Lives Matter, just get over it. Or responding to Time's Up, I'm sorry you feel that way. People's emotions aren't behavioral problems. They're not a lack of morality. They don't require an apology. They require us to be brave, to sit with what makes us uncomfortable, to listen and learn to the emotional experiences that we were lucky enough to avoid. I have hard conversations for a living, and I can tell you that it is completely and 100% worth every bit of discomfort. I connect with people in a way that few will experience. I have the honor of seeing people the way that they are, rather than as society says they should be. We should all be so lucky. And I believe that we can be. By giving up the fight against discomfort and instead pursuing peace. We can have big emotions and peaceful discourse by getting familiar with our own emotions. Notice it, name it, normalize it. Recognize that if our emotions are real and valid, that others must be too. Let's listen, learn, and work together on our newfound common causes. And give me a clap if that sounds way better than telling everybody that you're just fine.